Hello everybody, Jake Raby here, Flat 6 Innovations. I want to welcome you back to yet another part of our series, a focus on IMS bearing failure. Now in this particular video, we're going to cover what it is taking to initially prepare and assemble the R40 Flat 6 Innovations engine that will be going into our 29,000 mile Porsche 996. Let's just kind of take you back a little bit. Our C2 996 that had failed at 29,000 miles with the IMS bearing failure under the ownership of Pete, who you guys have gotten to meet at other videos in this series. This particular engine is now going to a 4-liter. So the R40 stands for 4.0. So it originally was a 3.6 liter. We have now increased the bore. We've done our other work to cylinder heads, connecting rods, and all that sort of thing. And we are creating the 4-liter from that original M9603 that came from our 2002 to 2005 Porsche 996. Now, I say 2002 to 05 because that is the generation that used the M9603 engine. Later on in 2005, actually, all the 2005 model year cars would have an M9605. It's still a 3.6, but it's a little bit different than this M9603. So what we've done to this point, and of course I want to help you guys understand, this is not an engine rebuild video series. I produced that last year. You can purchase it through the Knowledge Group. You can purchase it several places online. It is a 15-hour step-by-step video series showing every nut and bolt, every procedure, every specification type of measuring procedure required to build one of these engines. And you can purchase that. It's not cheap, but it is something you can purchase if you desire to build your own engine, or unless you want to see exactly what it takes to do what we do here at Flat 6. Now that engine was a stock displacement 3.8 liter. It did have Nikasil cylinders from Ellen Engineering and a lot of the other things that we've applied to this engine, but instead of it being a performance engine, it was set up to be stock. So if you guys want to see everything it takes to build one of these engines from that perspective, that video is something you can purchase. So one of the first stages of building an M9X engine is going to be building the crankshaft carrier and building that assembly up. Now, when we look at our crankcase with this engine is nothing more than a couple of clamshells that hold the cylinders. The cylinder heads actually do not even bolt onto the block halves. They actually bolt through the block halves and they end up bolting into this carrier. So the engine block with this engine isn't really the crankcase like most engines. We consider the block in the heart of the engine to be this carrier, because the series of bolt holes that you see here is actually what our cylinder heads are going to thread into with some really long head bolts that you'll be seeing a little bit later on. So the crankshaft carrier is unique in Porsche engines only to the M9X series of engines from 1997 through 2008. None of the Metzger-based engines use this carrier, and in 2009, starting out with a 9 Alpha 1, the carrier also went away again. So the carrier is something specific to this generation of engine, meaning that the assembly procedures that I'm going to be sharing with you roughly here and more in detail if you buy my video series will always show this crankshaft carrier going together first, because it is truly the heart of the engine. Now, what we see that comprises the crankshaft carrier assembly is the crankshaft itself. We have the carrier, which is two sets of clamshells that basically encapsulate and mechanically lock the crankshaft into place because they actually hold the bearing inserts. And then we have the timing chain here that drives the intermediate shaft. We call this chain number 1. And this particular engine, being an M9603, is a 3-chain engine. So it has 3 timing chains. This main chain, and it has 2 timing chains that run bank 1 and bank 2 of the Valvetrain respectively. So as you can see here, this crankshaft carrier assembly has been completed. We have the timing chains on, we have the oil control tray in place, we have its seals in place. Some people call this a crank scraper, some call it a windage tray. It's basically a black plastic tray that helps to keep the oil controlled as it returns back into the sump. But this level of assembly of the crankshaft carrier is how far we have to be before we can drop this into our bank 1 crankcase half and be able to start the assembly of the engine and not just the carrier. So what's unique about this is the fact that we build this engine with 2 radically different disciplines based on bank 1 or bank 2. Bank 1 of this engine kind of goes together like an inline 3-cylinder would. We're going to have its pistons and connecting rods married up together before they're inserted into the crankcase. And then on bank 2, you'll see that we already have 3 connecting rods in place. So these would be for cylinders 1, 2, and 3 respectively on bank 2, okay, which is actually cylinders 4, 5, and 6. So when we got them setting up like this, I always call them 1, 2, and 3 because that's what we see on the carrier. But they are going to go into bank 2, and they are going to be for cylinders 4, 5, and 6, with 6 being closest to the flywheel end of the crankshaft. That's the way you always kind of know that. So when you're building one of these engines, you have to make sure that you bring the connecting rods through the proper provisions in the crankshaft carrier. Otherwise, you're going to learn that you put the wrong rods on when you go ahead and drop that into the crankcase half. Okay? So now I want to show you a couple of more of the components that we've got before we move forward into our next stage of installing this into the bank 1 crankcase half. Okay, so here we have a couple of our very important components. So we have an H-beam style billet connecting rod here, and of course you can see it is specifically configured for the flat 6 R40 engine. And we also, the R40 series comes with our upgraded pistons. So these are made specifically for this combination by CP, or Carrillo Piston Company, and it is a true 4-valve piston. You can see that we've already balanced it here. We've actually got some video of that you'll be able to review, and even these have the flat 6 R40 designation laser etched into them. So the R40 is one of our most popular, high performance engines that we offer. So looking around here at a couple other things, you can also see that we have coated rod bearings, and we also had coated main bearings. So this is a dry film coating. We've been using this for many years, and it's an added benefit and an added insurance policy for engines that are going to see the track. And this engine being an R40, it is equally at home on the track or on the street. So as part of the R40 package, all engines would get the upgraded bearings that have the dry film coating applied to them. Now, I've seen engines that we ran for 2 or 3 or 5 seasons come back and still have the coating on them. Even though the coating is set up to be sacrificial, it just proves how well our oiling modifications were at keeping that film of oil where it belonged while the car was on the track. So that's kind of a critical thing. Of course, looking on over here at the carrier, these are upgraded timing chains. So they are not the OEM timing chain. We have upgraded them in every way, shape, or form, and they have been cryogenically enhanced, which is another process that we apply to a lot of the R40 or any of the R series engines. It's important to understand all the processes that we do here at Flat 6 Innovations that make the Flat 6 difference. The balancing that we do in-house, all the other things that we do in-house that make these engines special and make the R40 series even more special, because I assemble these here in my world at the Flat 6 Innovations Research and Training Facility. So we're going to show you some B-roll. We're going to show you some ring gapping procedures. We're going to show you some balancing procedures. We're going to throw some stuff in here that normally people just do not get to see. And then we're going to come back and be ready to drop this crankshaft carrier assembly into bank 1 of our crankcase. So moving on into the rest of the assembly here for what we call the short block portion of the engine, kind of want to show you what we've done so far. So you see that we, of course, had our crankshaft carrier assembled and on the bench in our previous scenes. Now we went ahead and we've installed that into bank 1 of the engine crankcase. So with that, you see that we have 3 connecting rods that are protruding here. These are for bank 2. Cylinders 4, 5, and 6 respectively. Now something that makes this engine quite unique to assemble compared to most anything else out there, unless you're used to working with Subaru EJ series engines or an EZ series engine, would be the fact that we have 2 different disciplines for installation of connecting rods and or connecting rods and pistons. So here on bank 2, once we put the crankcase half for bank 2 on, which is going to come in the next segment of this video series, you will actually see us putting the pistons into the bores and then coupling those pistons with the connecting rods with a couple of special tools after things are already in place, okay? On bank 1, which is the crankcase half that we have here now, we install the bank 1 cylinders and pistons completely different. We actually install them as a unit. Okay, so you see we've got the rod cap removed here. That's because we're going to insert the connecting rod assembly with its piston into bank 1, and then we're going to couple that rod cap into place, fastening it onto cylinders 1, 2, or 3 connecting rod journals. So put simply, we actually assemble bank 1 like an inline engine or like a V8 engine typically would be, where you marry your piston to the connecting rod, you knock that into the block, and you get things sealed up, and you fasten your connecting rod cap. Then, of course, here on bank number 2, we have just a piston that will be inserted into the bank 2 block half after it's fitted onto the crankcase, and we will marry that piston and connecting rod remotely inside the engine using a couple of special tools. So one of those I invented called the faultless tool. The other one we're going to use is a factory style tool. So now we're going to get these 3 pistons installed into bank 1 so we can move forward with the next segment in this video series. So I've just completed the connecting rod cap torque on all of our connecting rods for bank 1. So you saw me with a paint marker, that's a witness mark. That makes sure that we have completed all the torquing procedures for that particular connecting rod. There's a lot of different ways and methods people do things like this. Some people want to torque each connecting rod as you install them. Some want to wait until the end, then torque them all up, which is kind of what I do, so I can make sure the engine feels right as I'm able to do that. One thing I do after I torque up any connecting rod, especially the last one, is I just want to make sure the engine still turns freely, okay? So very free, just takes a couple of fingers, the engine still turns free. There can be times where you end up in a scenario where you put something on, even though it measured well, it wasn't happy, and you could feel the engine changed, it got tighter, something wasn't happy. With an engine, you've got to make sure it stays happy all the time. That's one of the keys. A lot of this comes from tactile feedback, so you'll notice I don't wear any gloves. Keep my hands clean, and of course, it's one of those things where when you're working with an engine, debris is one of your primary enemies. That's why we're here in a very clean working environment. Basically, this is one of our engine assembly areas here at Flat 6. So now that we've got the bank 1 connecting rods all torqued on, we're going to roll the engine over. We're going to check a couple of things on the top side. We're going to look at our deck heights. We're going to make sure all the deck heights are where they're supposed to be. All the calculations made it. That's basically the top of the cylinder to the top of the piston at exactly top dead center. Want to make sure all those are within my spec. Make sure our compression ratio is where we want it to be. This being an R40, it does have the highest static compression ratio of all of the Stage 2 engines. It's designed that way. That's one of the characteristics that make it an R40. Once we make sure those are good, we're then going to apply some sealant to some crankcase halves. We're going to pull off a couple of pieces of tape that we've got here to hold a couple of critical gaskets in, and we're going to introduce the Bank 2 crankcase half onto our engine. Okay, so we've got the Bank 2 crankcase half assembled onto our R40 4-liter Stage 2 track performer engine now. We're going to go ahead and fasten this down, torque everything to value, and then we get to do the fun part, which is install the pistons into Bank 2 using some special tools. So of course I've shot this video series to help you guys understand a little bit about what goes into one of these R-Series Stage 2 engines. Here we're going to go ahead and fit our camshafts, the rest of our Valvetrain components, and also in this video we're going to go ahead and dress the engine with all the ancillaries that it would normally have fitted to it before it goes in the vehicle, and we're going to marry the gearbox to it and have it set up all ready to go into our 29,000 mile all original chassis. Now that car has already been taken to the ceramic coaters and has had the beautiful black paint ceramic coated, and we're going to get this car all said and done with its R40 Street and Track Performer engine. We're going to get it broken in, we're going to put it through its paces of the dyno, we're going to do some tuning to it, we're going to do some other tricks to it, and we're going to see how much power we can give this 4-liter engine that started out as a 3.6 liter from that 29,000 mile car. So now we've got the camshafts installed, camshaft timing has been set, and we have the camshaft covers on Bank 1 and Bank 2. So we've already checked our cam time and made sure everything's good to go there. We make a few alterations for an engine like this. We don't use the factory settings in a lot of cases. So we are kind of altering things a little bit, which is normal for one of these R-Series engines. As you can see, the good paint detail, everything looks good. We've still got to put some black paint on our crank pulley and do a little bit more to detail it, but I wanted to get through the actual assembly so we could worry about, kind of doctoring it up and making it look even better. So now the next thing we're going to do is begin to dress the engine with all of its ancillaries. That's when it's going to get kind of ugly, because we're going to end up putting a lot of plastic pieces on it, hoses, wires, all that sort of thing. We'll take a few still photos as we do that process. We'll also take a little bit more video as we get to some milestones. And then we're going to have this thing all married up to the gearbox and ready to go into our project vehicle. So make sure you stick around and we'll show you how we're going to do it.